Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I am Elise Awwad, Chief Operating Officer at DeVry University. During today's digital dialogues, I'll be speaking with Raquel Tamez. Raquel has been widely recognized for her commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and for her career in the legal sector. She currently holds a position as Chief Inclusion and Engagement Officer at Charles River Associates, which is a global consulting firm and leader in providing economic, financial, and strategic expertise to major law and accounting firms, corporations, and government entities. And I must add that we are also very lucky, Raquel, I hope I don't make you blush here, but to have you as a member of our board of trustees here at DeVry University. So Raquel, thank you so much for offering your time today. We're thrilled to have you here with us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm excited.
Great. And in advance of an International Women's Day, I have to say I'm also excited to discuss a topic that we're both very passionate about, and that's the topic of elevating women and helping women overcome obstacles they may face throughout their careers, while also advocating for individuals and organizations to do something really important, which is to continue to empower and support women, ultimately working to close that gender gap that we see today in the workplace. And so that said, I just know that we're super eager to get into this conversation. So let's not wait. Let's jump right in. Raquel, I know I just went through your background, super impressive. You were a trial litigator, CEO of a STEM nonprofit, and now Chief Inclusion and Engagement Officer of a global consulting firm. And while all that is formally written up on your resume and on your LinkedIn profile, I just wanted to personally add that you're also a strong influence for women in leadership and an advocate for inclusivity and equality overall. Anybody that follows you on LinkedIn would see that. And not to mention, you've truly inspired me to continue taking advantage of opportunities as a female in an executive leadership role. So I thought we could start out by just talking through your journey with us and maybe sharing some detail around what's motivated you to dedicate much of your career to DE&I causes.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you're spot on when you say journey, because it is a journey. It has been a journey. I'm still on my journey. But when I look back at my life and my career trajectory, it seems I've either been on a mission or I've been a part of a mission. I am the youngest of 6. I am the daughter of immigrants. My parents immigrated from Mexico decades ago. My father was a migrant farm worker at one point in time, and I grew up in the hood in Houston. And I learned early on, I got the sense early on that education was going to get me out of the hood, that was the way that I would be able to do better for myself, to do better for my family, and to really realize the American dream, which is why my parents immigrated in the first instance. And so early sense of justice, listening to my parents with friends and family, and neighbors and hearing, oh, well, somebody got, dismissed or fired or didn't get paid for that, or that went wrong. And my parents and those around us really not knowing what to do or what resources, or having access, very little access to resources. And just early on thinking, wow, that doesn't sound right, or why aren't we doing something? Why aren't we fighting back? Which is really what prompted me to go to law school. And it really started there, because even in law school, I was part of an immigration clinic, and I represented women as part of the what's called VAWA, Violence Against Women Act. So it was women who were being abused in one way or another, and I represented them in immigration court. And thereafter, I became a trial lawyer for the U.S. Department of Labor. So it was all about employee rights and worker rights. Then it was Mary Kay Cosmetics. I was in-house counsel for them, corporate counsel, managed their labor and employment for 35 international subsidiaries. And in Mary Kay, for those of you who know or may not know, is all about the empowerment of women as entrepreneurs across the globe. And then I went into technology. And while I was in big tech, I managed global litigation, and it was all about really increasing diversity in the legal profession, really supporting Latina lawyers. I joke around and I say we're like these unicorns, we're these mystical creatures. You see us and then you don't. And then the opportunity to serve as the chief legal officer at Source America, came my way. And Source America is all about creating employment opportunities for persons with significant disabilities. And I, very much still advocate for persons with disabilities and veterans who service disabled, combat disabled. Then the opportunity to serve as the CEO of SHIP, which is all about creating employment opportunities for Hispanics in STEM. And I did that for 4 years, very proud of what was accomplished there. And now I am the Chief Inclusion and Engagement Officer at Charles Rivers, which is a consulting firm. We are the experts to the experts. Most of my colleagues are economists or lawyers or forensic accountants, data scientists, really smart people. But the opportunity there, not just to increase the diversity of our firm and bring up more women in leadership, but when you look at the talent pipeline in the field of economics, there's very little diversity there, even less than in STEM. And so I'm doing my part to really increase, to bring awareness and access to diverse, underrepresented minorities in the field of economics. And so I've always been a part of a mission or on a mission, and it's always really been about social justice and increasing diversity and bringing voice to those that are voiceless.
I absolutely love that. And I have to say, super empowering. And I think now folks that are listening in understand why we chose Raquel as our guest today. And I wanted to just maybe spend a little bit of time talking about your role prior to Charles River Associates, which is, you did just briefly touch on it. You served as CEO of SHIP, which stands for the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. And I know some think, and in the past I've thought this, oh wow, a female CEO. She's now making all the decisions. What an awesome place to be. Like, she's arrived, But I'm sure that that's also presented its fair share of challenges, especially when you talk about, underrepresented career paths, like, in the tech space. And we mentioned a couple of others, but I want to just double click on the tech space, which continues to be a male dominated field. And so I know CEO at the top, but I would just love to hear if you faced any challenges as CEO of SHIP, and maybe a fast follow with some advice for women and women of color entering into these male dominated roles and fields today.
Yeah, absolutely. No doubt. STEM, male dominated, roles of CEOs, male dominated. And I definitely came across my dose of the double standard and the double bind and male chauvinism, and men trying to put me in my place.
I can imagine that wouldn't have worked out well.
It's not great. I think it did help that, as a lawyer and litigator, that I've learned how to navigate those types of situations, how to sort of pivot or reframe and defend myself as necessary. It did keep me up at night when I think about young women and persons of color coming in through, coming to the tech field, which is, predominantly male, predominantly white, and how they navigate that, especially young women, because I have the skill sets to sort of reframe and defend myself. But what about those that may not have that skill set? And so the advice that I would give is one, being excellent. Be an excellent engineer, be an excellent lawyer, be an excellent leader. And then part of that is to really hone in your communication skills all the way around, written, verbal, how you interact with people, presentation skills. And then I would say, level up and hone in on your advocacy skills. Because advocacy is different than just effective communications. Advocacy is effective communications, but with an eye towards influencing. and influencing change. So really advocating for yourself, advocating for others, advocating for those that don't have a voice or the voiceless. One thing that really did surprise me too, as a CEO, is yes, a lot of responsibility and accountability and making tough decisions, which sometimes aren't popular, but holding yourself accountable for those decisions, and really trying to explain from time to time when questioned, the rationale behind those decisions. But it is very lonely being a CEO, and I think a lot of people are surprised by that when I say that, when I share that, reveal it. Because if you think about it, as a CEO, your boss is the board of directors, and you're part of the board of directors, but not really. And then there's your team, right? There's the staff, and you're part of the team, but not really. And you can be friendly, but not necessarily be friends, because sometimes you're going to have to make tough decisions that impact that person, that team member. And so it can be lonely because you're kind of in between. You're not part of the board and you're not really part of the team. And so it's important. And I found others like me. There's an organization out there for executives that are executives of member associations, nonprofits in STEM. And that was really game-changing for me, because I could go and really commiserate with them and get their opinion, and they were oftentimes a sounding board for me. Individuals within that organization were a sounding board for me, and validated that which I was experiencing or not experiencing. So it's good to have that network, and my network had to change from being a chief legal officer to being a CEO.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, first of all, thank you for the advice that you've shared. I'm already taking mental note of some advice to practice moving forward. But when you talk about your experience as CEO, it's kind of interesting, right? So it can be isolating and scary when you really listen to sort of your words, especially when you're used to having a support system or sounding board to bounce around challenges, solutions, experiences, and ideas. And I've been blessed, very lucky to have a strong group of individuals who continue to offer support as I navigate my career and personal life, be it mentors, personal board of advisors, prior coaches. I know that you've also had that experience. But for those starting out, I think you brought up a good point, right? It's really important to try to build this network of trusted advisors. It can be a bit nerve-wracking to know, to not know where to go, or to sort of think about how you begin assembling your circle, if you will. And so I'll say the more programs out there to help women, and I know you mentioned a few, and women of color feel more comfortable in taking these leaps and not fearing change or even failure, the better. As you know from being a board member here at DeVry's mission is to help with this challenge, right? To help close the society's opportunity gaps. And that's inclusive of populations that are generally underrepresented, especially in the tech industry. I'm proud to say we're deliberately working to solve for these challenges, right? So we've launched 2 programs to help drive change in this area. One is the Women in Tech Scholars Program, which we launched on International Women's Day last year, actually, March of 2021. And that's really helping connect mentors and building that sort of network for these women who aspire to break into tech careers or move up in current tech careers that they're in. And so most recently also, and I know you're passionate about this as well, we launched our Next Gen Hispanic Scholars Program, offering additional resources to create a more diverse tech workforce in the Hispanic community. So I bring all this up because after hearing you talk through your experience as a CEO at SHIP, I couldn't help but think about how powerful it is to have an accessible support system of those mentors, sponsors, and allies. And I know one thing that you and I have discussed in the past in some of our more recent conversations is the need for women to support one another and show up for one another. But I think it's also important to note that we both value diverse networks and circles of support, and have had inspiring male mentors and sponsors and allies throughout our lives and our careers. You had mentioned your family, your father. Can you share your thoughts around the topic of mentorship and sponsorship, and Advice, can you give advice on how others, men included, can continue to support women as they look to advance?
Yeah, mentorship. I think oftentimes people think that it has to be this really formal relationship, and it's never been formal for me. It's been about meaningful relationships with individuals in different at different phases of my life and my career. I will say this, that my father was my first mentor, is my mentor, continues to be my mentor. He's 98 years young. He is the wisest and wittiest person that I know. And whenever I'm grappling with something, he's one of the first people that I call. And I very much respect my father. And I'm grateful to both of my parents. My mom's 90, my dad's 98, as I mentioned. I'm grateful to both of them, and I'm lucky to have them both. And they're both mentors to me, but I really attribute who I am as a woman, as a human being, my success, to my father, who has always made me feel invincible and still does. So he's my first mentor, and I've had mentors in school and in different roles, different jobs, but they've all been sort of informal. I haven't gone and said, hey, will you please be my mentor, or, drawn up some kind of contract with someone. It's just been very informal, and my mentors have changed. I will say that many of my mentors are white men.
Yep.
Why? Because they have different experiences. Mm-hmm. Right. And I want to learn from those experiences. I do have a personal board of directors. We are the CEO of our own career. And it's just like a company has a board of directors. I invite everyone out there to have a board of directors. And this isn't a group of friends, right? These are people that you are friendly with, that have an understanding of where you are in your career and what those challenges might be. And these are people that you call, and sometimes they have to talk you off the ledge, and sometimes they have to nudge you and challenge you and push you. And you're just like a board of directors changes from time to time. People roll off and people onboard. Same thing with your own personal board of directors. And so I mentioned earlier that, my personal board of directors as a chief legal officer was looked one way. And then when I became a CEO, it looked different. And now that I'm back in, with a publicly traded company, I'm with a global firm, I'm in a new role, my personal board of directors is changing again. But I think it's important, in addition to your personal board of directors, to have those mentors. And, I have one in particular, Sylvia Acevedo, who was the former CEO of Girl Scouts USA, and she really helped me navigate, offboarding with SHIP and onboarding with CRA, and really just a very specific point in time. But I still call upon her. We're friends. And I will also mention here, because I think it's relevant, there's mentors and then there's career sponsors, right? And they're different. Yeah. And I've been fortunate to have career sponsors along my career trajectory as well. And so what is a career sponsor? A career sponsor is someone who advocates for you, puts you in the right room in front of the right people at the right time, extends opportunities, stretch assignments, that kind of positioning and advocacy. A mentor is going to really give you advice, and a career sponsor is going to advocate for you. And people have often asked me, well, how do you go about getting a career sponsor? Do you go ask someone? No, you earn it, right? Yeah. The career sponsor identifies you, right? But you earn it by how you show up, when you show up, how you perform, how you deliver, how you carry yourself. Are you consistent and credible and reliable? Are you excellent at what you do? That's what inspires someone, motivates someone to come and serve as a career sponsor for you. And then the last thing I will say too is executive coaching. I've had executive coaches throughout my career for one thing or another. There's sometimes a perception out there that if you have a career coach, there must be something wrong with you. I don't agree with that. I'd like to think that I am self-aware. I'm constantly checking to see, you know, where are there opportunities for me to do better? You know, what weaknesses do I need to neutralize? What strengths do I really need to enhance and build upon? And that's what executive coaches do. They come in for a specific thing and they work with you on a specific thing. And executive coaches are game changers. The unfortunate thing is that they're expensive. Yeah. And oftentimes companies won't afford those to everyone, or they might just offer them to sort of the emerging leaders, the rock stars that are out there. And I think it's those folks that are just there. And if they had an executive coach, they would be that rock star. They would be that emerging leader and ultimately that leader. And so if there's an opportunity for you to avail yourself of an executive coach, if you, you know, if you can get that through your employer or get some kind of sort of pro bono executive coaching, or if you can afford an executive coach, there's some that are very good and very reasonable. I highly, highly encourage it.
Yeah, totally agree with everything that you just said. And we have, you know, we have a diverse group of listeners today in the audience, and I know some are college students, some are, you know, just starting out in their careers, some are in executive roles. And so I think this, one phrase that struck me is, you know, you're the CEO of your own life and your own career, right? So, you know, I think this is very sound advice in terms of how to go about finding a mentor or building that personal board of directors. And by the way, I love the fact that you mentioned it's not about, you know, having a mentor fill out this contract, and coming from a lawyer, that was an interesting comment. But I think there were a lot of takeaways. And for those in the audience, if you do have any questions, please do throw them up in the chat. We will get to them here in a few minutes. But before we do, I wanted to talk about something that I think will resonate with many in the audience. Mm-hmm. So, because you and I have had this conversation, and I really think folks should hear your perspective here. I recently wrote and posted an article on LinkedIn, and the topic was centered around the feelings of imposter syndrome, your two favorite words. This seems to be a phrase I hear often from both women and men. So this is not gender specific, and this is regardless of career level or title. And I have to admit, you know, just throwing it out there, I've experienced this feeling in the past, and I've learned that trying something new without fearing that failure is fertile ground for something great to happen. And I've also learned to cut out all that negative self-talk and try to practice, you know, repeating the 4 words of learn and let go, because everybody fears failure and it's going to happen, right? I mean, you're bound to fail. And so you and I have talked about this, and I just wanted others to benefit from hearing your perspective around imposter syndrome and failure.
Sure. I am not a proponent of the concept of imposter syndrome. I don't sign up for it. I never have, and I never will. Imposter syndrome is oftentimes a term, a quick label, you know, a trendy label, used for women and people of color. And I, you know, do I have doubts? Yes. Am I anxious now and again? Yes. Do I sometimes question, like, why am I here? What am I doing? Am I gonna be successful in this this new role at this new company? Yes, those are very natural human questions and feelings. But as a lawyer, and a trial lawyer at that, I understand that words and labels are very powerful. Yeah. So I'm not going to refer to myself as an imposter or think of myself as a fraud. I have worked really hard to get where I'm at. And I bet you and everyone listening has worked really hard to get where they're at. And so why would I go and say to myself and internalize or say to others, oh, I've got imposter syndrome, or I feel like a fraud. I'm just not going to go there. And so I would invite you and anyone who's willing to listen to accept the fact, embrace the fact that you will have doubts. There will always be doubts, that there will be gaps in your knowledge and in your experience. But if you are self-aware and you're taking inventory of your life and where you're at, acknowledge those gaps and then do something to close those gaps, right? But embrace the fact that there will always be doubts. You will always there will be times when you will be anxious and unsure of yourself and not know something. Embrace that and then figure out how you're going to address it, bolster your knowledge and your experience, and then move on. Like you said, learn and move on.
Yep.
So I agree with you, but you're going to fail.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're going to have failures in your life. I've had some major failures in my life. And I am not one of those people either that celebrates failure. There's this thing now like, oh, celebrate, let's celebrate failure. No, I'm not going to celebrate failure. It hurts. It's painful. It's emotional. I'm going to allow myself to go through the stages, the different stages of emotion around failure. And when I'm, ready, and I try and ready myself as quickly as possible and go through those emotions, I move on, right? I take stock, I figure out what I have to learn from that failure, but I am not celebrating and I am not marinating in my failures. And
Great.
I'm inviting you to do the same.
Yeah, and I wanted you to touch on this because I know many struggle with this feeling of failure or disappointment, and I think your perspective is very sort of well put, right? And so I want folks to take a step back and sort of think about that advice. And so before we pop over to questions, Raquel, one thing we love to ask our guests who are part of these conversations is what are they reading? Whether it be to keep up with technological changes or to just continue in general on this path of lifelong learning. You are an avid reader. You've recommended several books to me over the past few months. So I'd love for you to just quickly share what you're reading.
Sure. I do read. I read a lot. I recommend reading to everyone. Even if you don't consider yourself a reader, find something, a genre that you think you might enjoy, and then start there. I love historical fiction. I love to learn about other time periods and other cultures through really strong characters through historical fiction. So I'm always reading historical fiction, but and I'm always reading multiple books. So this past year, I think I totaled 65 books. This year, I'm aiming for 100 books. I'm usually reading multiple books at the same time and very different. Right now, I'm reading Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. He's a Stoic. I'm doing a lot of research and reading and journaling on Stoicism with a capital S. Leadership in Turbulent Times. It features 4 presidents, and there are different types of leadership styles. With starting with Abraham Lincoln and his transformation leadership style, and then there is the Tao, T-A-O, of physics. And it's really talks about the intersection between modern physics, like quantum physics, relativity physics, and Eastern mysticism. Go figure. And then I listen to a lot of audiobooks and podcasts while I'm getting ready. I take masterclass. There's that.
Yep, same.
Masterclass. I do that. And when I'm curious about a book, I really rely on the app called Blink. So Blink, I recommend that to everyone. You can go in and they have basically snippets of, thousands of books, and you can listen to it, you can read them, you can take notes on them, and then they'll recommend other books. And if you like it, then you can actually go buy the book. That's my go-to when I'm exploring what I'm going to read next.
I love that. I wrote that down. I had not heard of Blink.
Yeah, it's a great app. One of my favorite apps. That and Calm, right? Because I do bedtime stories.
Yes, Calm is good, especially when you're trying to sleep and your mind is racing.
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We do have some questions here. Rosemary just asked, how do we make formal mentorship and support more accessible?
Well, one, serve as a mentor, right? Offer to be a mentor or be there for someone as a mentor, because in an ideal mentor-mentee relationship, it's a give and take, right? There's an exchange there. There's an exchange of value.
Yeah.
I know when I was at CEO, for example, I needed a mentor that was a millennial, because 10,000, members at SHIP are millennials, and I needed to really understand and, get to know my members. And I wanted to do that through a mentor who happened to be younger than me. But mentorships is, at the end of the day, it is about relationships. And something that one of my mentors, an informal mentor, told me is relationships are the currency of the workplace. And it is very, very true.
Yep.
Yes, I'm encouraging all of you to be excellent at what you do in the workplace, but it is as important, if not more important, to really nurture relationships in the workplace. And so it doesn't have to have the label mentorship, as long as you have a relationship, somebody that you can confide in, somebody that you can trust, somebody that you trust their advice, that will, sort of push back and nudge you and encourage you and motivate you, give you that advice that you wouldn't otherwise have. So mentors are all around, but because it's about relationships, but I would encourage you to start off being a mentor in the first instance.
That's great advice. That's great advice. There's another question, and I can help you out with this one. Naya and Mary both asked questions around how after graduating and beginning that job search, and this is definitely true when you look at qualifications, but many companies often want you to have years of experience. So you're graduating college, and now the qualification is a degree and years of experience. How would you recommend gaining said experience if you can't land the job without it? And I know there's apprenticeships and internships out there that are available to help you with that. But what's your perspective on it?
Well, certainly, I think it is, to the extent if you're in school and you have the opportunity to work, whether it's an internship or an externship or an apprenticeship, I highly, highly encourage you to take advantage of that. I was fortunate to be like a part of Inroads early on. So the day after I graduated from high school, I started my internship with Conoco, and I worked for them for 3 summers. I went to the University of Texas at Austin during the school year, and then I'd come home to Houston in the summers, and I worked for Conoco. And so there are formal internship programs out there, but sometimes you can do you get work experience on campus through on-campus employment. There are other opportunities. There's so much out there. But one way, and we used to recommend this to the members of SHIP, is if you are a member in a student organization and you're actively involved and you're doing things within that organization, especially if you have a leadership role, that's work experience. That's experience of, practicing being a leader, managing people, leading people, managing projects, managing budgets. that is experience. And so try and look for ways to translate what you're doing on campus and even what you're doing at home. If you have to, take care of your siblings, or you have to care for an elderly parent, that's work.
Mhm.
Right? I think society these days, they don't want to count housework and the work that's done in the home as work, but it is. And so I invite you to think expansively and creatively, and think about those things where you're putting an effort. Is that work? Is that experience that will translate and be able to connect the dots when an employer says they want work experience? You're working. You worked. You worked in your classes. Perhaps you worked on campus. So I invite you to think expansively.
I love that answer. Life is work, right? Final question. This came from Liz. So related to your comment about men as mentors, what else besides continuous advocacy can men in positions of power do to elevate women in the workplace?
Be allies, right? Be allies, be effective allies. Step in, step up, and be a career sponsor to a woman, to a young woman, to an emerging leader, to a person of color, someone different. I think there's lots of opportunities for men to step in and step up and do more. And one way is not only just to be an ally, but to be a career sponsor, to be a mentor, and to informally coach.
Love that advice. Raquel, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your thoughts on a number of incredibly important and relevant topics as we celebrate Women's History Month and on the heels of International Women's Day. This has been a great discussion. I truly always love the dialogue between you and I hope our audience found it as insightful as I did. And many thanks to our audience for watching. Please be sure to continue to follow DeVry on LinkedIn to hear more about some future digital dialogue events to come. Thank you again, Raquel.
Thank you. I very much enjoyed our conversation, Elise. I'll see you next week in Chicago.
Yes, see you next week in Chicago.